I've always valued loyalty and trust above all else. My life had a clear direction, from my military service in the Royal Marines to my marriage. I thought I had brought the same discipline into my family life. I met Julie when we were young, and though our relationship wasn't perfect, I believed we had built something strong. We faced challenges, but nothing prepared me for the betrayal that was about to unfold. We had 2 wonderful daughters, a home I thought was our safe haven, and I worked hard to be a good husband and father. Yet there was always a nagging feeling I was missing something. Still, I never imagined the scale of betrayal that hit me when I discovered that video. It marked the beginning of a storm I couldn't have predicted. I married Julie when I was 28, full of hope. By then, we'd been together for 7 years and had 2 young daughters, Annabelle and Grace. Julie always seemed like the perfect wife, and I thought we were both happy. That all shattered when I stumbled upon a video of her on a site called Lusty Wives. It felt like my entire world had been destroyed. I inserted the DVD and paused the video when Julie's face appeared. She looked slightly younger, but not by much. I dug out old photo albums, comparing pictures with the video. Finally, I found the match. Same hairstyle, makeup, and face from around our honeymoon. The realization hit me like a punch. She had made this video while we were newly married. I was stunned, but knew I had to act quickly. My military training kicked in. Attack is the best defense, and surprise is an advantage. My goal was to get her out of the house with minimal damage to myself. Julie and I didn't have joint accounts, and the house was in my name. I knew I could get custody of the kids, especially with the evidence I had. I grabbed black trash bags and started packing everything of hers. By the time I finished, I had several bags in the garage. Now I just had to wait. Julie, a legal secretary, got home late. She apologized and mentioned she'd dropped the kids off with her parents so we could have a romantic evening. I grunted a reply as she ran upstairs to shower. I removed her house keys from the key ring and waited in the kitchen. Soon she came down in a towel, confused about where her clothes were. I told her they were in the garage and that she needed to leave my life. She tried to deny it and started crying, but I made it clear. Either she leaves or I'll make her. I grabbed her arms and moved her toward the door. She tried to resist, but couldn't stop me. In the struggle, she stumbled and refused to get up, so I yanked her up by her hair. The towel fell to the floor as she screamed and slapped me, but I was too angry to care. When we reached the hall, I realized I was holding a clump of her hair. I opened the door, dragged her outside, and threw her onto the lawn where she landed in the rose bushes. I went back inside, grabbed her car keys and the DVD, then stepped back out. She sat outside on the lawn, visibly upset and crying. "Here!" I shouted, tossing her the car keys. "Take your car and get out." She just sobbed, asking, "Why, Greg? Why are you doing this?" I threw the DVD at her and said, "This'll tell you why, and there's more where that came from." The DVD shot her below the eye, cutting her cheek. I slammed the door and watched through the window as she struggled to cover herself. Funny, I thought. She wasn't so modest in that video. Across the street, Mrs. Edwards, the neighborhood busybody, came over with a coat and wrapped it around Julie. Of course, I thought, she'd help her. Julie found some clothes in the garage, got in her car, and drove away. Afterward, I cleared out the last of Julie's things, took a shower, and headed to the pub. I drank until closing and staggered home, collapsing into bed. The next morning, I woke up with a terrible hangover and heard pounding on the door. "I told you, all your stuff's in the garage," I yelled. "Mr. Maitland, this is the police. Open up." I opened the door to 2 officers. One asked, "Mr. Gregory Maitland?" "Yeah, that's me," I replied. "You're under arrest for attack causing actual bodily damage." I was stunned, my head was pounding, and I was barely awake. "Who did I attack?" I asked, thinking maybe something happened on my way home. "You're charged with attacking Mrs. Julie Maitland." I couldn't believe it. All I did was throw her out after finding out she made an adult film. "What's wrong with that?" I asked. The officer replied, "That's not for me to say. Please get dressed and come with us." I dressed and went with the officers, aware that my neighbors were watching as I was taken to the police car. At the station, they showed me photos of Julie's injuries, scratches, bruises, a cut on her cheek, and missing hair. It was painful to see, knowing I had caused them. I tried to explain, saying, "She made an adult film while married to me. What did you expect me to do?" The detective replied calmly, "I expect you to follow the law." Neighbors had already given statements, including Mrs. Edwards. I was charged and released on bail, with a court date on Monday. When I got home, Julie's belongings were gone. I expected to hear from her or her parents. But the weekend passed in silence. On Monday, my case was referred to Crown Court, and I had to surrender my passport. By Tuesday, I began working on my divorce. I gave my solicitor a copy of the video and a honeymoon photo. He predicted a swift process, expecting I'd get custody in the house due to Julie's behavior, and since she had a good job, she likely wouldn't receive maintenance. That lifted my spirits a bit, but on Wednesday, I received a letter from Julie's solicitors. She was filing for divorce, citing cruelty, and had an injunction keeping me 200 yards away from her, her parents, and our children. I was furious. She was divorcing me? I'm the sufferer here. I called my solicitor immediately. The second meeting wasn't pleasant. He was upset I hadn't told him the full story. Julie's claims of cruelty, along with the attack charge, made things complicated. A conviction could mean losing the house, paying child support, and possibly losing custody of the kids. He suggested changing the divorce petition to irreconcilable differences to avoid a messy court battle, but I refused. She cheated on me with multiple men. I couldn't let that go. So we stuck with the petition, knowing we'd have to fight it out. Leaving the office, I felt less optimistic. I realized I needed a bookkeeper since Julie had handled the books. After some searching, I hired Claire, a capable and blunt divorcee who took over. She joked that I was about to learn how much Julie's work had really cost me. In the following weeks, Claire's words rang true. The anger I felt from that night faded, but I started missing Julie and the kids. The house felt empty. I stopped cooking, ate out at the pub, drank too much, and work began to suffer. Soon after, I received letters about overdue mortgage and utility payments. Julie had canceled the direct debits. I owed hundreds, and the usual £1,000 I deposited for housekeeping hadn't been enough. When I told Claire, she laughed and said, "Welcome to the real world." A month later, I received a court date for the divorce hearing, but I hadn't heard from Julie or her solicitor. Meanwhile, I was still waiting for my trial date on the attack charge. I cut back on the pub, but wasn't taking care of myself. I visited Claire weekly to hand over paperwork, and I enjoyed her company, though she didn't share my enthusiasm about the divorce. She said, "At least you'll know where you stand." On the hearing day, I showed up in my best suit. Julie was there, but ignored me. In court, my solicitor presented the video, arguing Julie's behavior made her unfit to raise our daughters and requesting sole custody. Julie denied everything, claiming she was never unfaithful. I interrupted, demanding they watch the video. When they did, the judge agreed it looked like Julie, but she shocked everyone by revealing she had a twin sister, Caroline. Caroline testified, admitting she had made the video. She explained how she and Julie led very different lives. Caroline struggled with dependence and fornication, but had turned her life around with Julie's help. I was stunned, and the judge acknowledged the striking resemblance. My solicitor tried one last argument, but Caroline showed a tattoo on her ankle, proving she was the woman in the video. The judge dismissed my petition. During the recess, I apologized to Julie. She responded, "And you didn't wait to find out, did you?" before walking away. That afternoon, Julie proceeded with her petition. I didn't defend it, knowing I couldn't win. The judge awarded her custody in the house until the kids turned 18. Our assets were to be split, and I was ordered to pay child support. With the attack trial still ahead, my access to the children was to be arranged through social services. Feeling defeated, I went home to find a letter with my trial date. Needing someone to talk to, I called Claire. Over wine, I told her everything, and she was shocked. "You thought that was the right thing to do?" she asked. "I lost control," I admitted. She almost dared me to throw her out. "Do you think it was right now?" "No, I acted horribly. It wasn't even her in the video," I said, feeling ashamed. "Greg, you still love her, don't you?" she asked. "I don't know. I feel like crap about what I did." We talked more and finished 2 bottles of wine. When I was about to leave, Claire insisted I stay, saying, "I'm not letting you drive after all this." I stayed the night, unsure if it would complicate our friendship. The next morning, I asked Claire if she could manage my business if I went to prison. She agreed, though she hoped I wouldn't be sentenced. 2 weeks later, I pleaded guilty in court. I interrupted my lawyer, confessing that the video wasn't of Julie. I admitted to losing control, ruining everything, and sincerely apologized, asking for mercy. Julie then gave her statement, acknowledging my past kindness and explaining that I hadn't known about her twin sister who was in the video. She requested leniency, saying our children needed their father. Julie's plea for mercy surprised me, and I was emotional. The judge noted my remorse, military service, and Julie's request. He sentenced me to 6 months, but suspended it for 2 years. I had to stay out of trouble or serve the time. After court, I thanked Julie, admitting I didn't deserve her help. She said she didn't hate me, but hated what I did and advised me to get help. Back at work, my staff greeted me warmly, and I felt relieved. That night, Claire reviewed my finances and pointed out I had been taking more money than the business made. She also revealed Julie had been secretly transferring money to cover the shortfall, making me realize I wasn't the equal provider I thought. Claire bluntly said I'd lost a good woman, and I agreed. We discussed how to save the company, realizing I had to cut costs or raise revenue, though the latter would take time. Claire offered me a room at her place as a temporary lodger, joking about affection. That night, though I was with Claire, my mind was on Julie. The following week, I moved out, leaving the house for Julie and dropping the keys off at her parents' house. Social services limited my time with my children to 2 supervised hours a week. On top of that, I had to pay child support that exceeded my income. My life felt like it was falling apart. I had wrongly accused Julie, was divorced, had a criminal record, and discovered my business had survived only due to Julie's financial help. Determined to move forward, I realized I needed to cut 1,000 pounds in expenses, which meant letting one of the tire fitters go. I decided to offer Tom a part-time position with college training instead of letting him go entirely, and he agreed. I also contacted social services to arrange my supervised visits with the kids. The process was frustrating and felt demeaning, but I stayed calm. During my visit, the social worker offered to help me find resources to control my temper, as Julie had suggested. When I finally saw the kids, Annabelle ran to me, while Grace was more cautious. The supervised environment felt restrictive, and it was clear these visits were challenging for both me and the girls. Despite the difficult questions from Annabelle, I was determined to make the best of it. The first hour flew by, but as the kids grew bored, the second hour dragged. When the visit ended, I buzzed for Janice, who smiled as she told me she had found a program for ex-service members like me struggling with civilian life. She set me up with an appointment on Friday, and I joked about how grateful I was. That night, I told Claire about the visit. She laughed, saying, "You couldn't have planned this better. You're already addressing the issues they would have raised at a case conference. You'll be ahead of the game." I admitted, "That's not why I did it. I can't believe what I did to Julie, and it scares me that I could hurt someone like that." Claire reassured me, but was taken aback when I mentioned the violence I'd experienced firsthand. On Friday, I met John, a former soldier who had served in the Falklands and Gulf War. He explained how many ex-servicemen end up in prison for violent crimes, and how his program aims to help them. He asked me to explain what led to my trial, and I told him about the video and throwing Julie out. John probed deeper. When he asked if I felt sorry for Julie afterward, I admitted I didn't. He challenged my thinking, showing me the contradictions in my emotions. I realized I had hated Julie in that moment, the same way I hated enemies on the battlefield. He explained that I had tied anger to hatred, a useful trait in war but dangerous in civilian life. His goal was to help me break that link and channel my anger into something productive. After leaving John's office, I sat in my car with my head in my hands, feeling more overwhelmed than I had during any of my worst patrols in Afghanistan. When I got back to Claire's, she immediately noticed and asked, "What happened to you? You look awful." I couldn't deal with more questions, so I went to my room to try to read and sleep. Over the next few weeks, the therapy sessions became a bit easier, and my supervised visits with the girls improved as I learned to bring things like coloring books. My relationship with Janice grew friendlier, and after 6 weeks, she told me with a big smile, "We've decided supervision is no longer needed. You and your wife can now work out visitation on your own." Relieved, I thanked her and joked with her about telling her husband to take good care of her. The news lifted my spirits, and soon Julie and I agreed that I'd have the girls every other Sunday, with the plan to extend to weekends once I found a suitable place for them to stay. On my first visit, Julie was friendly, and we sat down for coffee. She mentioned that she had met Eric and knew about the changes at work. I told her I'd discovered she had been subsidizing my business, and now, without her help and with the added financial pressures, I had to make tough decisions. She apologized for not telling me about the extra money, saying she had just been trying to help without hurting my pride. We also discussed child support, and she reminded me that she wasn't receiving that money directly, and even suggested we appeal to reduce the amount. During the visit, I noticed our wedding photo was still in its usual place, and Julie was still wearing her rings. A few days later, my solicitor called to inform me that Julie was offering to give up her share of my business in exchange for my share of the house. Initially, I was shocked, but after thinking it over, I agreed to the deal, realizing that without the mortgage, I could manage better. When I tried to talk to Julie about it, she simply said, "It was never my intention to punish you, Greg. You're still the father of my children." Our relationship continued to improve, and sometimes she even asked me to pick up the girls from nursery. However, when the decree absolute arrived, officially ending our marriage, it was hard to accept. Claire took me out to dinner to cheer me up, but it only made things worse as she seemed to act like we were a couple. When I received a check for over £5,000 as part of my share of the assets, I felt uncomfortable accepting Julie's money and returned it to her solicitor. Though my marriage was over, Julie and I were getting along better, and for now, that was enough for me. Living with Claire wasn't working for me. While we were friends who sometimes shared a bed, I sensed a shift in her feelings. She started introducing me as her partner at social events, and even when I slept in my own bed, I'd wake up to her offering me morning affection. One evening, we talked about it. "Claire, we're still just friends, right?" I asked. She seemed embarrassed. "I hoped we were becoming more than that." I explained I loved her as a friend, but couldn't be the man she wanted. Julie could say the word, and I'd be gone. "I don't want to hurt you," I said. Tears flowed, and I held her as she cried. Eventually, I told her I needed to move out. She agreed, though it hurt, and I soon found a small flat above a takeaway. With that settled, I focused on growing my business. I sold my prized Morgan for capital, surprising Eric, who thought I'd never part with it. Julie was also shocked when she found out. "You sold the Morgan, but sent back the divorce settlement money. Do you hate me that much?" she asked. I explained it wasn't about hate. I didn't want to profit from my mistakes. I told her the money was for the business, and I needed to do it on my own. Over time, my new business idea, a roadside tire service for trucks, began to pay off, and the company thrived. Though things were looking up, I still felt lonely. Claire and I kept up our arrangement, but emotionally I remained attached to Julie, who didn't seem interested in getting back together. As Christmas approached, Claire invited me to spend the day with her, which I accepted. Later, Julie invited me to spend Christmas with the kids, which hurt because it felt like the invitation was just for the girls, not for me. I declined and offered to come on Boxing Day instead. Julie was upset, calling me at work to ask why I'd choose to be with Claire over my kids. I explained Claire had asked first and didn't have anyone else to spend the day with. Julie eventually calmed down and invited Claire to join us for Boxing Day. Christmas went well, and Julie even said she liked Claire. As we left, Claire remarked, "It's obvious Julie still loves you. Everyone sees it but you two. You were meant to be together." Claire was determined to get Julie and me back together, but we didn't realize there were forces working against it. After Christmas and New Year, Julie and I seemed to grow closer, but once she returned to work, we were back to being just cordial, leaving me confused. Meanwhile, everything else in my life was improving. In Aldershot, I had been leading the group therapy sessions for months when John told me I didn't need to attend anymore. I had made significant progress, which left me feeling proud. Life continued to improve, and 2 years after my divorce, I made a great business deal by buying a car dealership for £300,000. With Claire's help, I secured a loan, and soon J&G Auto Services was thriving. Tom had finished his course, and I offered him a chance to be his own boss by renting a bay in the new workshop. He eagerly accepted, and within a year, all the service bays were full, with my team making more money than ever before. Shortly after expanding the business, I met Kelly, a charming blonde who worked for an auto supply company. She flirted with me, revealing that her colleagues had nicknamed me the Iceman because I didn't respond to their usual tactics. She and I hit it off, and I asked her out on a date. Our first date went well, but Kelly was clear she wanted more than casual dinners. She invited herself over to my place the following week, and things quickly turned physical. While I wasn't expecting her bluntness, we ended up in bed. Though it was passionate, I wasn't entirely sure how I felt about the experience afterward. Despite my uncertainty, life was moving forward. My business was thriving, and I had new romantic interests, but deep down, something still felt incomplete. Julie and I remained distant, and Claire, always supportive, continued to encourage me to find my way back to her. The next day, Kelly stopped by to arrange another meetup. That evening, I planned a dinner and movie, wanting to get to know her better, not just repeat our previous nights. I shared some of my life story and tried to get her to open up, but getting her to talk was like pulling teeth. I decided to be patient and let her reveal things at her own pace. On Sunday, when I picked up the girls, Julie made coffee and asked about my new girlfriend, with a hint of jealousy in her eyes. "I'm happy for you," she said. "You need a woman in your life." "I do," I replied. But I need a particular woman, one who still loves me but won't let me back in." Julie repeated what she'd said before. She couldn't trust me or feel safe with me. I reminded her that social services and my therapist no longer saw me as a threat, but she still resisted. However, she didn't deny still loving me, which confirmed what Claire had said. Meanwhile, my relationship with Kelly became more sexual, but her secrecy puzzled me. One night as she was leaving, I asked, "Are you ashamed of me?" "Of course not," she replied, but I still felt like she was hiding something. A few days later, after another night together, I knocked over Kelly's handbag and found 2 gold rings inside, one with a diamond. My suspicions were confirmed. I pocketed the rings, planning to confront her if she didn't ask for them back soon. 5 minutes after leaving, Kelly returned, claiming she lost something in my bedroom. After searching frantically, she lied and said she'd misplaced her phone. I dialed her number and it rang from her bag. Then I showed her the rings and asked if she was really looking for those. She exploded, accusing me of invading her privacy. I pointed out her lies and told her to sit down. She confessed she wasn't divorced, still living with her mother and husband who worked night shifts. She sneaked out while her husband worked, and her mom thought she was out with friends. I pressed her, asking why she targeted me. Was it the challenge of cracking the Iceman, or was she looking to trade up for someone with more money? She had no answer, and the whole situation left me angry and disappointed. Tears began to flow as Kelly finally admitted the truth. "All of them, I suppose," she said. "The other delivery girls kept talking about how good-looking you were, and I wanted to see for myself. They said you never responded to their flirting, so they called you the Iceman. I wanted to thaw you out." She confessed that she thought I was lonely and would appreciate the attention. "But once we started sleeping together, I began to fall for you," she added. "Fall for me? We were just using each other for sex. There was no love in it," I replied. "It was satisfying, but not real love." "So why did you keep going?" she asked. "I liked you, and yes, I was lonely. But if I'd known you were married, I never would have started anything." She offered to get a divorce, but I told her that was her choice and had nothing to do with me. I explained that I didn't want to be the reason for another divorce and asked her to leave, making it clear I didn't want to see her again at work or elsewhere. As Kelly left, she apologized, kissing me tenderly. "That's how you start making love," I said as she walked out. The next day, a new delivery girl, Trisha, arrived, and I didn't offer any explanation to Eric. A week later, when I picked up the girls, Julie invited me in for coffee. She cautiously asked about Kelly, and I told her the relationship had ended because Kelly was married. Julie seemed genuinely concerned, and we discussed how I'd handled it calmly. She was surprised to hear I'd gone through a therapy program and that it had helped me control my anger. Despite the ups and downs, my life gradually improved. Business was booming, and I bought a house so the girls could stay over. However, things with Julie remained stuck. Whenever we were close to reconnecting, something would shift after she returned to work, and we were back to square one. 4 years after my divorce, I had turned my life around. Business was thriving, and Claire suggested I consult a tax expert. One day, while picking up some tires for the workshop, I noticed a stunning Aston Martin DB5 parked outside. Eric commented on the car and the driver, calling him an a-hole, which surprised me. I didn't expect that attitude from him, but it seemed there was more to the story. I got up to leave, but the door was locked. Eric had closed it. I watched him walk to the car park as a man, about 5'10", slim, with blonde hair, got out of the passenger side. He leaned back into the car and kissed the driver. That's when I realized it was Julie. I sat down, overwhelmed, my head in my hands. I knew this day would come, but seeing Julie kiss another man at my own workshop was too much. I broke down, crying. Eric came back half an hour later and handed me the receipt. "Sorry, boss. I was hoping you wouldn't be here when he showed up." "It's fine, Eric. It was bound to happen someday," I replied. "No, it didn't," he said. "Not with an idiot like him." I then asked Eric why we were charging £500 for 2 Pirelli tires. He explained the guy had been bragging about spending time in bed with his girlfriend, who turned out to be my ex-wife. To teach him a lesson, Eric added £100 for his gloating. The next weekend, when I picked up the girls, I didn't mention seeing Julie with her new guy. I noticed our wedding photo was gone, and when I asked, she said she must have put it away while cleaning. I also saw she had taken off her rings. "I see you're not wearing your rings anymore," I remarked. "Well, I haven't been married for 4 years," she said, avoiding eye contact. And it has nothing to do with Uncle Miles, who the girls keep mentioning? I asked. She didn't respond, and instead gathered the girls for me. As my 40th birthday approached, I decided to cheer myself up with an extravagant gift. On the day, I arrived at work to find the place covered in birthday banners. Eric and Tom gave me some cheeky cards, promising a night of heavy drinking after work. That evening, we hit the pub, and they'd arranged everything. My favorite beer on draft, regulars showing up, and plenty of laughs. Around 8:30, a policewoman and her colleague came in calling out my name. My heart sank, thinking something bad had happened. But it was all part of the surprise. A mock ticket for having no insurance, followed by a hilarious striptease. She ended the act by slipping her number into my pocket before leaving. Later, Eric announced we were heading for a curry at the Star of India, where the wives and girlfriends were already waiting. As the group paired off, I felt suddenly alone, until Claire walked in looking stunning. Eric mentioned he'd tried to invite Julie, but she was too busy with A-hole. Claire sat beside me and touched my hand. "Isn't it nice to be with people who love you?" she said. We ordered food, and the night carried on. Despite the fun, I couldn't shake the disappointment that neither Julie nor the girls had sent me a birthday card. Claire, sensing my mood, leaned over and said, "You're not going home tonight. Come to mine. I've got something for you." I smiled. "It's not Zex I need." She grinned back. "But we can do that too if you like." The party wrapped up around 11, and since Claire had only had orange juice, she drove me back to her place. Once there, she handed me an envelope and a gift. The card was funny, as expected, but the gift surprised me. A collection of 4 vinyl records by John Lee Hooker, Howlin' Wolf, Elmore James, and Sonny Boy Williamson. I was touched, knowing how hard it must have been to find them. Claire kissed me softly and said, "Let's make this night even more memorable." The next morning, we stopped by my place so I could grab fresh clothes and check the mail for birthday cards from the girls. There were none. At work, I endured the usual jokes about turning 40, like finding a walker where my chair should have been. After dealing with some mail, I found Tom in the workshop. "Who do I thank for last night's celebration?" I asked. "All Eric's idea," Tom replied. "He organized everything, even the dancer. She really liked you, went above and beyond." On Sunday, I picked up the girls, driving the new car I bought myself for my birthday. When we arrived at Julie's, Annabelle asked her mom, "Have you seen Dad's new car?" Julie, surprised, asked, "What brought that on?" "It was a birthday present to myself," I said. "Last Wednesday." Annabelle lashed out at Julie. "I told you we had to shop for Daddy's birthday, but you made us go with Miles instead. I hate him, and I hate you." Annabelle clung to me while Julie's eyes filled with tears. I reassured her Annabelle didn't mean it. She was just upset about missing my birthday. Julie apologized, saying she hadn't realized, and I pointed out that Eric had left her messages, which she must have missed. Taking the girls for a day out, we had a fun time at the river, and when we returned, Annabelle stormed inside, ignoring Julie. I told Julie, "She doesn't hate you. She's just upset and feels like you're putting Miles before everything." Julie, tearfully, admitted she had hurt me by forgetting my birthday and said, "I never meant to use the girls against you." "I know, but Miles might have," I replied. I also mentioned Eric's frustration with Miles and thanked him sarcastically for contributing to my birthday party by overcharging him. I left Julie in tears, feeling bad but recognizing that the problem wasn't mine to fix. It was clear Miles was driving a wedge between us, and I feared any chance of reconciliation was slipping away. A few days later, I received a package, a pilot's chronometer engraved, "To Greg on his 40th birthday," from Julie, Annabelle, and Grace. I called Julie to thank her, and she proudly said she chose it herself, though I suspected Miles had a hand in it. I told her, if it wasn't engraved, I'd return it. What I really wanted was for the girls to pick out something for me. Julie went quiet, then said, "I tried to make things right." "No, you tried to spend money to make yourself feel better. If you want to fix things, take the girls shopping next time." Her silence turned to anger, and she snapped, "I have a right to my own life." "You do," I agreed. "But if your responsibilities to the kids are interfering, maybe it's time to consider letting me take over." Julie hung up, and I thought to myself, well, that didn't go too well. The next time I picked up the girls, Julie barely spoke to me. I placed the box with the watch on the kitchen counter. "You'll just have to pay for a new back," I said. "You couldn't just accept my apology and gesture, could you?" she replied. "I don't call a 400-pound watch a gesture," I said. "Let's just move on." Once again, Annabelle glared at her mother as we left. Our relationship remained tense, so I was surprised when Julie called and suggested dinner at Gino's, a small Italian restaurant, for Friday night. I had mixed feelings. Julie hadn't shown any interest in dating me since the divorce. I suspected Miles had dumped her and she was seeking comfort. I made sure I looked my best with a suit tie and fresh haircut. When Julie arrived, she took my breath away, dressed in a low-cut black dress looking stunning. I greeted her. "You look gorgeous." "Thank you. You're looking good too," she replied. We had a pleasant meal, chatting about the girls and work, avoiding the subject of us. After dinner, I decided to address the elephant in the room. I took her hands and said, "I've been hoping for a second chance for years." She pulled her hands away. "Greg, I didn't invite you here to discuss getting back together. In fact, it's the opposite. I'm getting married to Miles once his divorce is finalized." I was stunned, but tried to hide it. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "There is something you can help with," she said. "Miles's family wants the girls to take his name." I was floored. "Wait, you're asking me to let him adopt my children? How long have you known him?" "I've known Miles for about 6 years. He's a barrister and works with our practice." Suddenly, it all made sense. He had likely been influencing her during our entire divorce, undermining any chance of reconciliation. "So he's the one who kept you from giving me a second chance?" "Not exactly," she said defensively. "Miles gave me advice, but calling him a poison pusher is unfair." "Okay, let's get back to why we're here. You're asking me to let a man my daughters dislike adopt them." "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "I thought you'd be happy to stop paying the £300 a week to the CSA. I controlled my anger. "Julie, I've changed, but I'm not the kind of man who would sell his children." "I didn't mean it like that," she said. "I was just pointing out the benefits." "Tell me, how does this benefit the girls?" She had no answer. "Right," I continued. "So this benefits only you and Miles. Why should I agree to it?" After a pause, she said, "Miles can't have children, and his family will disown him if he marries me without the girls taking his name." I knew this was nonsense. Something didn't add up. Miles was using the situation to his advantage, likely expecting me to refuse so he could blame me. "I don't think much of a man who puts inheritance above love," I said. "But I'll consider it under 2 conditions. My access to the girls stays the same, guaranteed in writing, and I won't sign anything until you're married. I won't give him any control over my daughters unless you're there to protect them." Julie was so caught up in the conversation that she didn't notice the Aston Martin pulling up outside. Miles had crossed half the restaurant before she realized he was there. "Hey, babe," he said. "Are we done here?" He glanced at her and mistook her happy tears for sadness. "I told you he wouldn't go for it. When has he ever cared about your happiness?" Miles added. "I think you misunderstood," I said. I agreed, but I have some conditions. I laid out the details of the contract I wanted. "But that doesn't change much," he complained. "It gives you what you want. My daughters can take your name, but I won't lose my rights as their father," I explained. "That's unacceptable," he retorted. I told him I wouldn't sign anything until they were married. "So we have to trust you?" "You could back out after we're already married," he said. "Miles, you're making it sound like you don't actually want to marry her," I said, gesturing to Julie. Julie, looking in her compact, said, "Not looking too lovely right now," and excused herself to the ladies' room. While she was gone, Miles kept trying to provoke me, but I stayed calm. When Julie returned, I stood, shook Miles's hand, and squeezed hard, leaning in to whisper, "If you ever hurt her or my kids, I'll break your neck. That's a promise." He paled. As I prepared to leave, Julie kissed me gently on the lips. "Thank you, Greg. I can see you've really changed," she said softly. The next Saturday, I got a frantic call from Annabelle. "Daddy, come quick. Mommy's not well. I can't wake her up." I rushed over in my car and found Julie unconscious in bed, with a half-empty hard drink bottle and some missing pills. I grabbed the pills, scooped Julie up, and told Annabelle to get Grace. We all piled into the car, and I sped toward the hospital. About a mile in, a police car pulled me over. Recognizing me, the officer, an old army buddy, PC John, offered to escort us to the hospital. Once there, I handed the pills to a nurse and was led to a waiting room with the girls. PC John and his partner, WPC Nicola Bates, soon joined us. John asked, "Who's the lady, Sarge?" "Just call me Greg now. That's my ex-wife, Julie," I said. WPC Bates, already noting things down, asked, "Isn't she the woman you were charged with attacking a few years ago?" "Yes, but this has nothing to do with that," I said, trying to stay calm. I regret what happened back then. And what happened today? She asked. Annabelle quickly jumped in. I called Daddy because Mummy wouldn't wake up, I explained. There was hard drink and sleeping pills on the nightstand. I got her here as fast as I could. And you didn't call an ambulance? WPC Bates asked. I thought I could get her here quicker myself, I replied. John stepped in. We're just doing our job, Greg. Bates seemed satisfied and put her notebook away, smiling at Annabelle before saying, Now let's hear more about your dad. John added, We're off in an hour. I'll stop by later to check in. After John and Nicola left, I reassured Grace and Annabelle that their mom would be okay. We waited anxiously for what felt like forever, but after about 30 minutes, a nurse told us Julie was responding to treatment. An hour later, I was allowed to see her. She looked rough. Her hair was matted, and she had a saline drip in her arm, clearly feeling the effects of a bad hangover. I'm sorry, she muttered. I ruined your weekend and scared the girls. I didn't mean to. Why, Julie? I asked. What were you trying to escape? I just wanted to block everything out, she whispered. I wanted to sleep and stop thinking. Thinking about what? What could be so bad that you needed hard drink and pills to make it go away? I asked, confused. Tears welled up as she confessed. I've been such a fool, Greg. He didn't want to marry me. He just used me. She broke down sobbing, and a nurse suggested I let her rest. Back in the waiting room, John and Nicola were keeping the girls entertained. Nicola, now in casual clothes, looked stunning. The girls were relieved when I told them their mom was okay, but that we'd have to wait before taking her home. John leaned over and said, You could use this as evidence if you want to contest custody, you know? I don't want that, I replied. The girls need stability, and Julie has always been a good mom. She just needs help now, and I'm here for her. Nicola added, At the station, some paint you as a monster, but John says you're a good man. I'm starting to think he's right. After some more conversation, John left, and Nicola stayed with the girls while I checked on Julie again. Before leaving, John whispered to me, My mates would eliminate to get a shot with Nicola. Julie was looking much better when I saw her again, and the doctor told me she could go home as long as someone stayed with her. Julie mentioned she needed clothes, so I went home to get her some with the girls' help. On the way back, Nicola asked for a ride home, and I was glad for the chance to talk more. When we arrived at her flat, she smiled and said, Nice car. I'd like to drive it sometime. I'm sure we can arrange that, I replied with a grin. As she said goodbye, she slipped me a piece of paper with her number. Call me, she whispered. Back at the hospital, I delivered Julie's clothes, assured the doctor I'd stay with her for the next 24 hours, and brought her home. She played with the girls while I cooked lunch, but I knew I'd have to wait until the girls were in bed to get answers. Later that night, Julie joined me on the sofa with a glass of wine. She tucked her legs under her and sighed. I've been such a fool. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. He didn't want to marry me, she admitted bitterly. He just needed me to cover his lies. You were supposed to fight the adoption so he could blame you. So how did you find out? I asked. His wife came to see me, Julie said, her voice shaking. She told me he never filed for divorce and never would. His career depended on staying married. She knew about his affairs but stepped in because I wasn't married. Julie sobbed in my arms, and I reassured her, You'll be okay. You just need rest. The next morning I made breakfast, and the girls were excited to see me cooking. Over breakfast, I pitched a trip to Spain or Portugal, and the girls were thrilled. Julie, however, was skeptical. You know we can't just take off. I'd need time off work. Tell the doctor everything, and he'll sign you off for 2 weeks, I suggested. You can take it as holiday if you want. Her eyebrows raised, but I continued. I've booked a Mediterranean cruise for next week. You can take the girls. Julie was initially angry, accusing me of trying to share a cabin with her. But when I clarified that I wasn't going, she softened and hugged me, grateful. That evening, after spending a lovely day with the girls, I returned home and called Nicola. We made plans to meet at a pub later that night. She was direct, confident, and I found myself looking forward to seeing her. At the pub, Nicola looked stunning, and as we sat down, she got straight to the point. I've heard different stories about you, Greg. I've seen the good, but I need to know about the bad. I knew I had to be honest. I took a deep breath and began telling her the full story of what happened between Julie and me, hoping she would understand. I thought Julie was cheating on me, I began. I found a video on an adult site and was convinced it was her. It broke me. I hated her. and in my anger I did something terrible. Later, I found out the woman in the video wasn't Julie. It was her twin sister, a twin I didn't even know existed. But by then, I had already done something I couldn't take back. I paused, feeling the weight of what I had said. Nicola remained silent, watching me. I threw Julie out of the house, and I did it far too forcefully. I'll never forgive myself for that. But in court, she stood up for me, telling the judge I needed help, not prison. I ended up spending over a year at a clinic in Aldershot, working through my issues with a therapist named John. Eventually, he told me I didn't need the sessions anymore. Nicola's expression softened, but I could tell she still needed more answers. Then there was Kelly, I continued. I got involved with her after Julie, only to find out she was married. I confronted her husband. Nothing violent happened, but I didn't handle it well. Ever since, I've been trying to keep my life together. Anger is still a battle for me, but I've been working on it. Nicola's eyes were teary. So, when you ask who the real Greg Maitland is, I said, my voice heavy with emotion, the answer is both. I'm not proud of who I was, but I'm doing everything I can to be a better man. The Greg sitting here now wouldn't react like that again. I've learned to separate anger from hatred. Nicola reached across the table and clasped my hands. She stood, kissed my forehead, and walked away. For a moment I thought that was it, but she wasn't leaving. She was headed to the restroom. When she returned, she smiled and said, I could use another drink, signaling that she was giving me a second chance. We stayed until closing time, and I drove her home. Outside her flat, we sat quietly in the car for a moment before I asked, Can I see you again? She smiled softly. Yes, pick me up tomorrow night. We kissed before she left, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt a sense of peace. A few days later, I drove Julie and the girls to Falmouth for their Mediterranean cruise. Annabelle promised to email me daily, and as they boarded, Julie hugged me tightly. Thank you, she said. I watched them sail off, feeling content that they were happy. While they were gone, Nicola and I spent almost every night together. The connection between us grew, and on Friday night, she finally invited me to her place after dinner. We made love, not just physically, but emotionally. I hadn't felt that way in years. The next morning, I was late to work for the first time since my divorce, and Eric teased me. Annabelle's emails from the cruise were a joy to read, and Nicola loved hearing about them. We spent as much time together as possible, though her evening shifts sometimes limited us to lunch dates. I also focused on my business plans and made a bid for a dealership in Bishop Stanton. During this time, I visited Claire and told her about Nicola. Claire was happy for me, saying, You deserve to be happy. On Saturday, I picked up Julie and the girls from the cruise. Grace talked excitedly about their adventures, and Annabelle teased that the ship's captain might have a crush on Julie. Back at Julie's house, we had a quiet moment. She thanked me again and hinted that she wished I had been on the cruise with them. That evening, Nicola showed up at my door, visibly shaken. She told me about a fatal accident involving a stolen car she had been pursuing. I held her as she cried, and we spent the night together, just comforting each other. The next morning, I gave her a key to my house, letting her know she could come over whenever she needed. Later, I saw Julie and asked about her first day back at work. She seemed distant and mentioned hearing rumors that Miles had died in a car accident. I asked how she felt, but she wasn't sure. Annabelle, overhearing, said, I hope he's dead, and Julie quickly reprimanded her. I wasn't sure how Julie felt, but something in the air had shifted. That evening, we had dinner as a family. It was nice, and Julie seemed to make an effort to make me feel welcome. She asked about my business, and I mentioned I was opening a second branch of drive-in auto services. What happened to J&G Auto Services? She asked. Doesn't it make you sad to see it go? J&G stood for Julie and Greg. I shrugged. Not really. You wanted nothing to do with the company when you traded your share for my half of the house. At the time, my share of the house was worth more, she pointed out. True, and I couldn't afford the mortgage then, so it worked for both of us. Well, it's sad. Another connection between us is gone. At the end of the night, I headed home, sensing she wanted me to stay. The next day, the inquest into Miles's end of life was held. Julie asked me to go with her. The police ruled it an accident. Miles had likely fallen asleep at the wheel. There were no skid marks, and his car had been coasting when it hit the tree. The coroner asked about self-destruction, but the evidence didn't support it. The pathologist noted some unusual trauma, but nothing to dispute the police's conclusion. Miles had booze in his system, which made falling asleep more likely. During a break, I approached Miles' widow. "Would you consider selling the wreck?" I asked. She looked surprised, but took my card. "Why?" "I thought about restoring it," I said. "You will not," she snapped. "I never want to see that car again." Julie overheard, and we laughed about it. After the inquest, Julie went to the restroom, and Miles's widow approached me again, hinting at dinner. Disgusted, I declined, but she didn't miss a beat, still suggesting we go out. Julie returned, and I introduced them. "Yes, but I know her as Julie Baker," the widow said coldly. Julie, caught off guard, explained that she used her maiden name at work. Then Julie turned to the widow, full of sarcasm, accusing her of lying in court about being a devoted wife when Miles had been with her for a year. The widow smirked. "When £500,000 is on the line, lying gets easier. If self-destruction had been suspected, the insurance wouldn't pay. And we both know Miles only loved himself." Julie fumed, but the widow handed me her card. "Think about my offer." After she left, Julie muttered, "She gets $1 million, and I get nothing after 6 years with him." Her words surprised me. Had she always been so money-focused? And why 6 years? We'd been divorced for 5. Something didn't add up. I drove Julie back to work, and we had lunch with one of her colleagues, Allison. As we chatted, Allison made a comment about how I was supporting Julie after her affairs with Miles. The word affairs stuck with me. There was more going on than I'd known. As I reflected on everything, I started piecing it together. Something about Julie's timeline and behavior hadn't felt right for a long time.